beginning of Jesus' ministry, he had been baptized by John. He had called his 12 closest disciples. He'd been tempted in the wilderness. And as soon as he began to preach and teach and heal all manner of sickness and disease, a huge crowd began to follow him. And seeing the multitudes, he headed up a hillside where there was plenty of room below him for all to hear. And he began to teach them. These were just regular people. These were people who were drawn to God, but they were repulsed by the words and the lives of those who were considered religious. They desired God, but they didn't want the religion that they saw from the religious. But they did like what they heard Jesus say. And they loved the life they saw Jesus living. They were eating up every word he spoke. It was like nothing they had ever heard before. Yet somehow it resonated with something they knew to be true. Among other things, he said, "When you give to the poor, don't make it a huge spectacle," which is something they had seen the religious people do. And in like manner, he said, "When you pray, don't stand and speak loudly in the synagogue or choose the prominent street corner like the religious do," and they had seen it all. But then he said something about how they should pray. The old King James says, "But when ye pray, use not vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think they will be heard for their much speaking." I pulled out for you some of the various translations for the two key words in what Jesus has said. And I think a lot of these are good. This is not a criticism of English translations, but it's an acknowledgement that our English language changes over time. I've highlighted here a couple that I think today best communicate what Jesus was talking about. When Jesus was speaking on the hillside, he was giving the people good news, and it felt like good news. Today, I want to bring you good news. I believe there is a concept in those final words of Jesus that if you fully internalize it, it will change everything about how you view God. It will change everything about how you interact with God. And of course, it will change how you talk to God. I believe it truly will infuse you with more joy in your life and give you a stronger, more lasting peace. More good news. It is a free gift from God, but you must accept it. And note as we begin today, this gift is not just for those who have not yet surrendered their life to Christ. It is for maybe people in this room who consider themselves Christians who have not fully embraced this concept. Now, in the times when Jesus was speaking, and certainly for the century and many centuries before, the people who lived on the earth who were not God-fearers lived a type of spiritual life, and it was a robust spiritual life, that I'm going to call today suspicious. For every aspect of life, for every need for which they did not have total control themselves, they had a God. This God was to be appeased. In their temple worship, every ritual act was to earn the favor of the god. It might have been through sacrifice, it might have been through lengthy incantations. All were intended to display their devotion and submission. But in this arrangement, there was an inherent bargain. I perform all the required rituals, I make all the required sacrifices, and the gods would give me what I wanted, what I had earned If it was the rain god, I got rain. If it was the harvest god, I got a good harvest. So back then, to be a pagan didn't mean you weren't spiritual. You didn't have a spiritual life like it kind of means today. It meant that you worshiped these gods. You did what they asked, and they were to do for you as well. Now, despite the myth that our society and humanity has progressed over these many centuries to be more progressive than the ancients, still today we see these kinds of practices, shrines, rituals, holidays all over the world focused on gods and sometimes on relatives who died before, the worship of ancestors. We even see it today within groups that would be classified technically as part of Christianity. I distinctly remember my first year in the real estate industry. I was flipping through a catalog of products that were being marketed to real estate agents, and I came across a statue of St. Joseph. And I thought, who's proofing the catalogs these days? How did the statue to St. Joseph get into this catalog? And I thought, maybe something, I need to check this out. This is before the days of the internet, of course. And I researched it, and to my shock and surprise, thousands upon thousands of people were buying statues of St. Joseph, burying them upside down. Doesn't work if you don't do it upside down in your yard near the for sale sign to make your house sell faster. No joke. And this is still going on. That was back in the 1900s. And I believe that there are still superstitious acts going on within Christianity today. And I'm even going to say perhaps in this very room today. All people of faith are susceptible to falling into this mindset and this way of behavior and interacting with God. And that's why Jesus is teaching these regular people like you and me on a hillside not to come at prayer and not to approach God in this way. Thankfully, Jesus lays out a much better way. And spoiler alert, it's all about the basis upon which we say our prayers. Now let's fast forward into the future, maybe not so far in the future. We are just across the street at Buc-ee's. Some of you are triggered already. Imagine that I show up at this Buc-ee's and wander up to a stranger at one of the 150 gas pumps that are arrayed before me. Now, if I ask that stranger for directions, that's not going to be deemed odd at all. I might be able to ask him or her if they're from around here, and if they are, could you give me some recommendations on a good place to eat if I've already had my fill of the Buc-ee's barbecue and beef jerky? There is a kind of understanding about my approaching that person. We could call it common humanity. We all, as humans, know what it's like to be lost and need directions. And in fact, some of the women in this room actually know what it's like to ask for those directions. That is well within the scope of the relationship I have with this person at the gas pump. But if I ask them for their shirt, that has crossed a line. If I ask them for $500, well, I could do that, but they're going to call 911. I've been asked for my shirt, and I've been asked for $500. But it was someone that I had a relationship with. It wasn't a stranger at a Buc-ee's gas pump. Same request. In one case, it's ridiculous. In one, it's just weird. Now, Mike and Suzanne Pruitt have an apartment in the basement, kind of a garage/basement apartment, and I believe currently it is for rent. This is a business relationship. The tenant has the responsibility to follow some rules and pay the rent on time, basically not burn it down, and the Pruitts have responsibilities. They must provide this private space for the quiet enjoyment of this tenant. They must ensure that the health and safety issues are all taken care of. And in the course of normal use and wear and tear, if there are repairs need to be made, they are responsible for that. This is a conditional relationship. I have a very small property management business, and I have learned to keep the relationship conditional. I have someone close to me who has a property management business, and it is her practice to befriend all of her tenants. She buys them presents for holidays and visits them and chats with them. And bless her heart, they start paying the rent late. They start failing to keep up their responsibilities on the property. Many of you have seen this at the office. Someone newly gets elevated to manager and is for the first time supervising people, and they're going to show us how this is done. They're going to be the buddy of everyone who works for them, and they're going to have friendship management. I think anyone who's been in a workplace for very long knows it's not when, but if. It's not if, but when. All of this ends badly for everyone. Now, not too many years ago, the tenant in the basement apartment at the Pruitt's house was Lanny. This is a different relationship altogether. You can imagine how different it would be in so many ways to have your child in your home versus having a renter in your house. And now I think you're starting to pick up on the important concept I want to talk about today, the basis on which we approach God. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Judy Blume book and now movie, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. This is basically every Hollywood movie prayer I've ever heard, every TV show. It starts something like this: God, I don't even know if you exist. I don't know if you're even out there, but, and then they go into whatever their crisis is at the time. And maybe this is where you are in prayer now. It's okay to start there. Jesus is saying it's not okay to stay there. So we move on to transactional prayers, the prayers of the superstitious. You know, if you wear those lucky socks inside out, your team's going to win, kind of superstition. And this is whether we're talking about imaginary gods, dead relatives, or the true God himself. This is the type of business relationship that Jesus is warning us not to try to have with God. Now, the word translated babbling in our English Bibles in this passage is really about empty words. And when it says they'll be heard by their many words, the word many is really literally translated anxious. And I think empty and anxious are two very good words to use in this case. Because ultimately, the test as to whether you interact with God like a pagan or a heathen or a superstitious person is what happens when you do not get what you ask for. If you don't get what you ask for, and this is how you interact with God, you will be left feeling cold and empty and anxious. You'll be cold and empty because in your heart you'll be saying, I've been paying the rent. I deserve to get these things from you, God, but I didn't get them. So what's the point of me doing all the right things and saying all the right things? Or you'll be anxious because in your heart you'll say, I thought I'd been paying the rent, God, but I didn't get what I asked for. So obviously I'm not doing all the right things, or I'm not doing them in a worthy and appropriate manner pleasing unto you. Either case, you prove that you are a superstitious renter. The people gathered on the hillside were familiar with both. The people who claimed to be religious, and this was their approach to God, and the people who worshiped idols and false gods. Same approach. And they had seen the emptiness, the coldness, the disappointment, even the anger that came from going through all that and not getting what you asked for. We might say this person says, God, come into my life, be my landlord, I'll do my part, and you do yours. Jesus instead wants us to say, God, come into my life, be my Father. I don't deserve your favor, but your Son in my place lived the life I was supposed to live. died the death I should have died. And so on that basis, I approach you as your child. Those two words, our Father, to me, they get to the very essence of what it really means to be a Christian. It means we literally are the adopted children of the King of the universe. This is a concept that has so much depth, so many meanings and implications for us. Thursday morning, I took Vance Lucero to breakfast after I'd heard I'd be filling in today. So I wanted to talk to him about the entire process that his family went through to adopt Jonathan. And it's an inspiring process for sure. We started with that prayerful decision to grow their family. He walked me through all the paperwork and the background checks and the home visits, which should probably be called home inspections, maybe even more appropriately, home invasions. The interviews, the supplying of references, and then the key questions, the form. And this blew my mind. I want you to imagine with me that you're presented with this form. Will you accept just a boy? Or will you accept just a girl? Would you accept both? What age will you accept? What age will you reject? Is there any race of child you will not take? What about physical problems, physical limitations, ongoing issues? Perhaps the mother drank during her pregnancy, issues that never will be resolved. What about mental challenges, mental health history in the family? What are you willing to accept? Emotional, psychological issues. I'm sure that the Nordmans would have much to say of this, and you might corner the Luceros, but they have agreed, they have kind of a work-in-progress draft journal that they've been keeping during this process, and we've posted it in the private Facebook page for Tri-Lakes members if you'd like to read that. I think you'll be inspired by that. But think about how God fills out this form. He is willing and able to accept any sex, any age, any race, any baggage that you have, any limitations you have, whatever your record is, he says, yes, 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 yes. I want everybody. How great is that? All through this multi-year process, Jonathan was not their child until the judge's gavel came down and declared it to be so. And when it was so, and it is so. When Jonathan misbehaves, he is not any less their son than he was before. But think how we treat our God and expect that he gives up on us with each failing that we make. In fact, when things are going well, I think Vance and Casey probably don't really think much about their role as mother and father. But if Jonathan were to be in danger, or to be sick, or to misbehave, I expect they would lean into their role as parents, not step back. And the same is true for our Father. And think about how adoption is a choice by the parents. Jonathan still doesn't understand what happened. Maybe one day he will. This is an action by the parents. This is something God did for us. And more than any adoptive parent, God knows everything about you. And he knows everything you've done. And beyond that, he knows everything you will do. Every time you will fall short, every time you will fail, every time you will cause him pain, every time you will harm others, and he still chooses you. How great is that? Some might be thinking at this point, well, come on. At some level, isn't God everybody's father? Well, yes, at some level, he is. But what Jesus is calling for is for us to enter into a real father-child relationship with God. And as the scripture that Mike read earlier says, as many as received him. This is a gift for sure, but it must be received. Like any gift, it must be accepted. But this isn't a temporary offer, a limited time offer. You see, he gave rights. Jesus' life, death, and resurrection locked this in. This offer will always stand until he appears again. It is your right that you can claim, but you must claim it. Now, when we hear about adoption these days, we generally think about the Nordmans or the Luceros, maybe the Howards in other cases. But back in the time Jesus was teaching, there was a very different type of adoption that would have come to mind to the hearers. It wasn't about growing a young family. It wasn't about showing compassion to a young child. It wasn't about young couples and babies. This is going to sound a little weird. Check me on this. You can Google it later. Adoption at this time was primarily an aging, wealthy man who had no heirs. And he would adopt an adult. This was almost all adoption at this time. So it could have been a relative. It could have been a nephew, some second cousin. It could have just been an upstanding young man in the community. It might have been a loyal servant. In some instances, it was actually a slave. It was mostly about passing on wealth. Sometimes it was about power. While you're Googling, look up Julius Caesar, who adopted Octavian, who was very much a grown man. He was a general. Because Julius Caesar needed an heir to what was the throne. When this adult got adopted, and hear me on this, all his debts were canceled. He legally gained all the rights and privileges as if he had been a natural-born son. It was transformative in his identity, not just his bottom line and his legal status. So when Paul is talking about adoption, he's talking about this kind of adoption, and I hope you are making the spiritual applications as we go. To the Galatians, Paul says, God sent forth his Son that we might receive adoption as sons. And because we are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Daddy, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, an heir through God. To the Ephesians, he says, his unchanging plan has always been to adopt us into his own family. And he did this because he wanted to. To the Romans, he says, you did not receive the spirit of slavery, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Daddy, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and fellow heirs with Christ. And I love the passion that John brings to this in the letter we know as 1 John. He says, behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. In our modern language, behold is something like, get your mind around this, or stop and let this sink in, or dude, check this out. And when he says, what manner of love, it's actually a Greek idiom that means from what country. If Bill did something really random, I said, dude, what planet are you from? Well, they couldn't conceive a planet and people living on planets. So the most extreme idiom they could come up with is something from what country is this from? There is no equivalent to the love that is shown by God adopting us as his children. There's no country, there's no planet, there is nothing to compare this with. John wants us to pause and grasp and internalize this powerful concept. We are the children of God. It changes everything. It changes everything now. We don't have to wait. Now, if you work hard all week at work, and Friday afternoon your boss presents you with a paycheck, you do not exclaim like John, "Behold, what manner of love the boss has lavished upon us, that he has paid us for the work we did at the rate we agreed to in advance. Hallelujah." No, because you earned it. When you go back to your rented apartment and you turn the key and it actually works and you look inside and your furniture is there, not in the yard, you don't say, "Oh, behold, the manner of love the landlord has bestowed upon me. He did not evict me, even though I paid my rent on time and took care of the place," because you earned it. This is the difference in the enthusiasm we should feel as we approach God as his children. Now imagine you wake up at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night. You're thirsty. You're a little bit scared. You leave your room, and I teleport you, not down the hall, but to your boss's bedroom. You nudge your boss awake and say, "I'm thirsty. Can you get me a drink of water?" What's your boss going to say? What's your boss going to do? Like, "How did you get in here? What are you doing here? Are you nuts?" I can think of all the things the boss would say before calling 911. Rewind back to 3 a.m. It's the middle of the night. You're sleeping soundly. You feel a tug. As you rouse to wakefulness, you notice your tiny son or daughter is at the bed. They say the same thing. "I'm thirsty. I'm scared." Do you call 911? Do you ask if they're nuts? You hug them. You get them a drink of water, and you go curl up in bed with them until they drift off peacefully to sleep. This isn't theoretical. My niece and nephew are classmates with two of the children that died in Camp Mystic in Texas. So this week, my brother-in-law and sister got to try to explain to my little niece and nephew what happened to their friends from school. And this week, 3 o'clock in the morning, they got the tug. My sister didn't call 911. They could ask for anything, and they would have gotten it. So when you pray, do not pray like the superstitious do. Pray, "My Father." Pray like the persistent neighbor in Luke 11, banging on the door continuously at midnight until he got bread for his guests. Be like the persistent widow in Luke 18, banging on the door of the judge over and over until she got justice. When you pray, pray like Moses, begging for God not to wipe the rebellious and ungrateful Israelites off the face of the earth, and they deserved it. Praying and praying to him, first to spare them, then to accompany them, all the way to he said, "Okay, now show me your glory." His prayers got more ridiculous, more aggressive as they went, because God was his father. Pray like Abraham, begging for people of Sodom to be spared who did not deserve it. If you could just give me 10, give me 50, give me 40, give me 30, more and more ridiculous, unless he's asking his father. I haven't been to the other side. I think John, Mr. Behold, got a little glimpse at some layer of heaven, and he knows, I wish he were here to describe it, the warmth, the intensity, the intimacy of the embrace you will receive when you are face to face with God. And all of that he wants you to experience now. He has his name on your hands. Your name is engraved on his palm. I wanted to have a certain song for our invitation today. but I was told we don't know it here. But I didn't want to just read you the lyrics. It's very short, but I'm going to play it for you. I think it'll help you get more of a feeling that we're supposed to have about God as our Father and Him as our children. I'll put the lyrics up once I get the AV to work. Can you hear this? The offer on the table today is for you to be adopted by the one who owns everything, all the money, all the stuff, the one who is the most powerful. He's not a titan of industry or a head of state of a major world power. He is over all, and He is perfect in His love and His care. He knows your every real need. And He not only makes huge promises if you will accept His offer, He has the power and the will to make those happen, to give you full rights and privileges as His son, His daughter, His heir, and to enjoy His presence forever. If you haven't accepted the offer, the elders will be at the back of the room today. Just step out of your row, talk to them while we're singing the next song. But if you have been living in a landlord or an employer relationship with God, the offer for you today is to change the basis of your approach to that of being His child, so you can experience the joy and the peace and the security now of acting and feeling like the child of God you are. Whichever offer is most appropriate for you, I encourage you to accept it. While together we stand and sing.